The sharp crack of his hand against my face echoed across the bright afternoon garden, silencing more than 200 guests in an instant. My cheek burned, but the pain wasn't what shattered me. It was the expression on my 6-year-old son's face as he watched his father strike me during what was supposed to be the happiest celebration of our lives. Balloons floated above perfectly decorated tables. A string quartet stopped playing mid-song. Crystal glasses froze halfway to people's lips. My mother-in-law smiled with quiet satisfaction while everyone else stared in stunned disbelief. 22 years of marriage collapsed in a single heartbeat, and in that unforgettable moment, I realized something terrifying. The woman I had spent decades trying to be no longer existed. She had disappeared beneath years of silence, sacrifice, and excuses. That afternoon, I made a promise to myself. By sunrise, my son and I would be gone forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty, forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and everyone deserves hope and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from, share this story with someone who may need encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue bringing emotional journeys like this to families around the world. My name is Meredith Holloway, and until that anniversary afternoon, I believed enduring pain was simply part of being a devoted wife. Looking back now, I understand that love and suffering are not the same thing. I simply confused one for the other for far too many years. I met Graham Holloway when I was 24 years old, working as a junior accountant in a small architectural firm in Portland. Graham was charismatic without trying, the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday, held doors open for strangers, and could make an entire room laugh with a single story. He had inherited a successful construction company from his father but never acted entitled. At least, not then. Our relationship grew slowly, built on weekend hikes, long afternoon drives along the Oregon coast, and countless conversations about dreams that seemed beautifully ordinary. We wanted a quiet home, a family built on honesty, and children who would grow up believing they were deeply loved. When we married, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The first 5 years truly were wonderful. Then Eleanor Holloway moved in. She had recently become widowed after Graham's father passed away unexpectedly. Graham insisted she shouldn't live alone. I agreed without hesitation because I believed family always came first. I couldn't have imagined how dramatically one decision would reshape our future. Eleanor possessed an elegance that impressed everyone she met. Perfect posture. Impeccable clothes. A calm smile that concealed razor-sharp criticism. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. Instead, she mastered quieter weapons. Every meal I cooked somehow lacked flavor. Every decoration I chose looked inexpensive. Every parenting decision was questioned. Every accomplishment became insignificant compared to someone else's. At first Graham defended me gently. Later he remained silent. Eventually he agreed with her. It happened so gradually that I barely noticed the transformation. If dinner was late because traffic delayed me after work, Eleanor would sigh dramatically about how women once understood responsibility. If I bought affordable furniture instead of expensive designer pieces, she would remark that appearances reflected character. If I spent Saturday taking our son Rowan to the park instead of attending one of her social luncheons, she reminded Graham that children required discipline, not constant entertainment. Each criticism ended with the same sentence. I'm only trying to help. Over time, Graham repeated those words himself. My confidence slowly disappeared. After Rowan was born, things became even more complicated. He was a cheerful little boy with freckles scattered across his nose and an imagination that transformed cardboard boxes into castles and pirate ships. He adored dinosaurs, strawberry pancakes, and following me around the kitchen while asking endless questions about everything he saw. He also noticed far more than adults realized. Whenever Eleanor criticized me, Rowan quietly reached for my hand. Whenever Graham dismissed my opinions, Rowan wrapped his small arms around my waist. Children understand emotional safety long before they understand complicated family dynamics. By the time Rowan turned 6, Graham's company had expanded into one of the largest construction businesses in the region. Success changed him in subtle ways. Meetings became more important than birthdays. Business partners mattered more than family dinners. Expensive suits replaced comfortable sweaters. The humble young man I married gradually disappeared beneath ambition and constant pressure to impress everyone around him. Still, I kept believing things would improve. I always found another reason to stay hopeful. Maybe next month. Maybe after the next project. Maybe after the next holiday. Maybe after the next conversation. Hope can become a prison when it convinces you tomorrow will fix what today refuses to change. Our 22nd wedding anniversary arrived on a beautiful spring afternoon filled with sunshine. Graham insisted on hosting an extravagant garden celebration at our estate. Business associates, neighbors, local politicians, extended family, and longtime friends filled every corner of the property. Professional photographers documented every smile. Caterers arranged elegant displays beneath white tents. Fresh flowers lined every pathway. Everything looked perfect. Only our marriage wasn't. That morning, I noticed Graham seemed distant. He barely acknowledged me while greeting guests. Eleanor, meanwhile, floated from table to table accepting compliments as though she were hosting the celebration herself. Just before lunch was served, Graham stood beside a microphone to thank everyone for attending. He spoke about success, family traditions, loyalty, commitment. People applauded enthusiastically. Then Eleanor requested to make a short toast. She smiled warmly before describing how difficult it had been watching her son carry so many responsibilities almost alone. She praised Graham's leadership, generosity, and patience before casually mentioning that some women simply failed to appreciate extraordinary husbands. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked toward me. I forced a smile. Eleanor continued by saying modern wives expected recognition without earning respect and suggested marriage only succeeded when women remembered their proper priorities. The words landed like tiny stones. Each sentence hurt. But I remained silent. I always remained silent. When she finished, Graham laughed awkwardly instead of correcting her. That hurt even more. Trying desperately to save everyone from embarrassment, I quietly approached Graham and suggested we move on to dessert. It should have ended there. Instead, Eleanor accused me of interrupting because I couldn't handle honest criticism. She claimed I had always been overly sensitive. The garden fell strangely quiet. Every eye turned toward us. I whispered that today was supposed to celebrate our marriage, not criticize it. Graham's expression hardened. He stepped closer. His voice became cold. He accused me of embarrassing him in front of important clients. I reminded him softly that I had said almost nothing. Then it happened. His hand struck my face with shocking force. For one endless second, nobody moved. Not the guests. Not the photographers. Not the musicians. Even the wind seemed to disappear. I slowly lifted my hand to my burning cheek. Across the garden, little Rowan dropped the paper airplane he had been folding. His eyes filled with tears. He wasn't crying because he was frightened. He was crying because his world had just broken. Eleanor folded her arms. Instead of looking horrified, she appeared satisfied. Graham immediately seemed stunned by what he had done. His breathing became uneven. But pride refused to let him apologize. Instead, he spoke words I will never forget. If you can't respect this family, then maybe you shouldn't be part of it. Those words hurt far more than the slap. Because in that instant, I realized he no longer viewed me as family. I looked around the garden. Some guests stared at the ground. A few quietly left. Several women looked heartbroken. One elderly couple gently shook their heads before walking away without touching their untouched meals. No one celebrated anymore. The anniversary party had become a public funeral for our marriage. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply walked across the lawn toward Rowan. He ran into my arms before I reached him. His tiny hands trembled as he wrapped them around my neck. He whispered only 4 words. "Mom, let's go home." I kissed the top of his head. For the first time in years, absolute clarity filled my heart. Home wasn't the mansion behind us. Home was wherever my son felt safe. I carried him toward the front entrance while hundreds of silent guests watched. Behind me, Graham called my name. I kept walking. Eleanor said something else. I never turned around. Because sometimes the strongest thing a broken heart can do is refuse to look back. The drive away from the estate felt strangely peaceful. The afternoon sun streamed through the windshield, casting warm light across Rowan's tear-stained face as he sat quietly in the back seat clutching the stuffed fox he carried almost everywhere. He didn't ask where we were going. He didn't ask if we would return. He simply watched the familiar streets disappear behind us, as though he already understood that some roads were never meant to be traveled twice. My cheek still throbbed, but the deeper ache came from realizing that the child I had tried so hard to protect had witnessed the one thing I prayed he never would, his father choosing anger over love. Instead of driving to our house, I headed toward my older cousin Celeste's cottage nearly an hour outside the city. We hadn't seen each other often over the years because marriage, work, and motherhood had kept us busy, but she had always reminded me that her door would never be closed to family. When she opened the front door and saw my swollen cheek, she didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped both Rowan and me in a hug so gentle that every ounce of strength I had been holding together finally began to crumble. Rowan immediately wandered into the backyard where Celeste's friendly golden retriever greeted him with excited tail wags, and for the first time that day I heard my son laugh, even if only for a few seconds. While Rowan played outside beneath the bright afternoon sky, I finally told someone the truth. Not just about the slap, but about the years that had led to it. The constant criticism. The loneliness. The feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I was always failing someone else's impossible expectations. Celeste listened without interrupting. She never once asked why I hadn't left sooner. Instead, she quietly placed a cup of tea in front of me and said something that stayed with me forever. Sometimes people don't leave because they are weak. They stay because they keep believing love will return. That single sentence broke something open inside me. For years I had blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't patient enough. Maybe I wasn't supportive enough. Maybe I wasn't beautiful enough. Maybe I expected too much. But sitting in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by sunlight pouring through the windows, I finally realized that none of those excuses justified what had happened. Respect should never have to be earned through suffering. Meanwhile, back at the estate, the anniversary celebration had ended in complete disaster. Guests left early, conversations spread quickly through the city, and the photographs that had been intended to celebrate 22 years of marriage became painful reminders of the moment everything fell apart. Several business partners quietly distanced themselves from Graham after learning what had happened. One investor canceled an upcoming meeting. Another postponed negotiations indefinitely. People who had admired Graham's public image suddenly questioned the man behind it. Graham returned to an empty house. For the first time in decades, the silence inside those walls felt unbearable. He searched every room before realizing that Rowan's favorite backpack, several sets of clothes, family documents, and our photo albums were gone. Only then did he understand that I hadn't left to prove a point. I had left to protect our son. His first instinct was anger. His second was panic. By late afternoon he began calling repeatedly. I didn't answer. Messages filled my phone one after another. At first they sounded defensive. He insisted everything had been a misunderstanding. He blamed stress. He blamed pressure. He blamed embarrassment. Not once did he accept responsibility. Then, after several hours without a response, the messages changed. He asked where Rowan was. He asked if we were safe. He asked if we would come home. I read every message without replying. Because apologies that arrive only after consequences rarely heal old wounds. The following afternoon a family attorney contacted me. Graham wanted to discuss reconciliation before involving the courts. The attorney sounded polite and professional, but even through his carefully chosen words I sensed urgency. Graham wasn't only afraid of losing his family. He was afraid of losing the reputation he had spent decades building. I agreed to one condition. The meeting would take place in a public park during the daytime. Rowan would remain with Celeste. When I arrived, Graham looked exhausted. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes were red, and for the first time in years he seemed smaller somehow. The confidence that had once filled every room had vanished. He apologized. At least he tried to. He admitted the slap was unforgivable. He admitted he had lost control. He admitted he wanted us home. But every apology was followed by another excuse. Work pressure. Financial stress. His mother's influence. The difficult year. The demanding clients. I listened quietly until he finished. Then I asked him one question. Had this been Rowan's future wife standing where I was, would you tell her to forgive a man who struck her because he was stressed? He lowered his head. He couldn't answer. Because the truth was painfully obvious. No loving father would ever want that life for his child. Then why should any mother accept it for herself? The silence between us lasted several long moments. Before leaving, I gave him one final piece of honesty. The slap wasn't the reason I walked away. It was the proof that the marriage I had been trying to save had already ended long before that afternoon. Over the following weeks I rented a small townhouse near Rowan's new school. It was nothing like the luxury estate we had left behind. The kitchen was tiny. The living room barely fit our old furniture. The backyard consisted of little more than a patch of green grass and one maple tree. Yet somehow it felt larger than the mansion. There was room to breathe. Room to laugh. Room to make mistakes without fear of criticism. Every Saturday afternoon Rowan and I planted flowers beneath that maple tree. We painted old flower pots together. We baked cookies that came out burnt half the time. We turned cardboard boxes into castles again. Little by little, joy returned. Not because life became perfect. Because peace had finally become possible. Across town, Graham's world continued unraveling. Without realizing it, he had built his entire identity around success, appearances, and pleasing everyone except the people who mattered most. As news of the anniversary incident quietly spread, employees began seeing him differently. Friends stopped inviting him to family gatherings. Several longtime clients ended contracts, explaining they preferred working with companies whose values matched their own. The greatest consequence, however, came from somewhere he never expected. Eleanor. Instead of comforting her son, she criticized him relentlessly for allowing the situation to damage the family's reputation. She blamed me for leaving. She blamed Rowan for being too attached to his mother. She blamed society for encouraging women to become independent. For the first time in his life, Graham heard her words exactly as I had heard them for years. Cold. Controlling. Cruel. He finally understood that the voice he had spent decades defending had slowly become his own. One bright afternoon, nearly 3 months after I left, there was a gentle knock on my townhouse door. When I opened it, Graham stood there holding nothing except a small wooden birdhouse. He looked nervous. The birdhouse wasn't for me. It was for Rowan. He remembered that Rowan loved watching robins build nests every spring. There were no expensive gifts. No dramatic speeches. Only a father who finally seemed willing to learn humility. I invited him into the backyard. Rowan looked uncertain. Children forgive carefully. Not because they hold grudges. Because trust means everything to them. The three of us spent the afternoon attaching the little birdhouse to the maple tree together. No one mentioned the anniversary. No one pretended everything was suddenly fixed. Healing wasn't that simple. But for the first time in many months, hope quietly returned, not for the marriage we once had, but for the possibility that broken people could become better parents. The first robin arrived less than a week later. Rowan spotted it from the kitchen window one sunny morning while eating cereal before school, and his excitement filled the little townhouse with a happiness I hadn't heard in years. He raced outside without even finishing breakfast, pointing toward the tiny birdhouse that he and his father had hung together beneath the maple tree. 2 robins had already begun carrying twigs and dried grass inside. Rowan looked back at me with the biggest smile on his face and whispered that maybe the birds believed this was a safe place to build a family. His innocent words settled deep in my heart. Safety. That was all I had wanted for him. Not a mansion. Not expensive vacations. Not luxury. Just a place where love never had to compete with fear. As the weeks passed, Graham remained respectful of every boundary I established. He never arrived without asking first. He never pressured Rowan to spend time with him. He never demanded forgiveness. Instead, he quietly attended counseling, enrolled in an anger management program, and began meeting regularly with a family therapist. I learned these things not because he announced them, but because his actions slowly revealed a different man than the one I had left behind. For the first time since I had known him, Graham stopped trying to defend himself. He started trying to understand himself. One afternoon he mailed me a handwritten letter. There wasn't a single excuse inside. No mention of stress. No blaming his mother. No blaming work. No blaming me. He admitted that he had mistaken silence for peace, obedience for respect, and control for leadership. He confessed that every time he had failed to defend me from Eleanor's cruel remarks, he had chosen comfort over courage. He wrote that the slap had not been a single terrible mistake. It had been the final consequence of hundreds of smaller failures that he had ignored for years. When I finished reading the letter, tears quietly rolled down my face. Not because I suddenly wanted my marriage back, but because genuine accountability is rare. Months later, the family court finalized our divorce with mutual custody arrangements focused entirely on Rowan's well-being. There were no dramatic courtroom arguments. No public accusations. No attempts to destroy one another. Some relationships survive. Others teach. Ours had become a lesson. Graham moved into a modest townhouse only 15 minutes away so Rowan wouldn't spend hours traveling between homes. The large estate was eventually sold. Ironically, the house Graham had worked so hard to impress everyone with no longer meant anything to him. He once told our family counselor that he finally understood something. A house becomes empty the moment respect leaves it. Eleanor refused to accept the divorce. She insisted I had destroyed the family. She attempted to convince Rowan that I had taken him away from his father. But children recognize honesty. Rowan politely listened before telling his grandmother something that surprised every adult present. He said families aren't broken by the people who leave. They're broken by the people who make others feel unsafe enough to leave. Those words came from a 9-year-old boy. The room became completely silent. Even Eleanor had no response. Not long afterward, she chose to move into a retirement community closer to one of her sisters. Before leaving town, she unexpectedly asked to meet me at a botanical garden one warm afternoon. She looked older. Smaller. The confidence that had once intimidated everyone had softened. For several moments we simply walked among blooming roses beneath the bright sunshine. Finally, Eleanor admitted something I never expected. She had spent most of her own marriage feeling invisible. Her late husband had constantly criticized her, and instead of healing from those wounds, she had unknowingly passed them to the next generation. Controlling others had become the only way she ever felt powerful. Her confession didn't erase the pain she caused. But it explained it. She quietly apologized. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. Just honestly. I accepted her apology. Forgiveness didn't mean inviting her back into my daily life. It simply meant refusing to carry the weight of bitterness any longer. Forgiveness set me free far more than it set her free. Years passed gently. The little maple tree in our backyard grew taller each spring. Every year, robins returned to the same birdhouse. Every year, Rowan insisted on checking whether new baby birds had arrived. Life slowly became wonderfully ordinary. I accepted a promotion at the accounting firm where I had worked for years. For the first time since my 20s, I began making decisions based entirely on my own dreams instead of everyone else's expectations. I traveled with Rowan during school holidays, explored national parks, learned photography, and rediscovered the parts of myself I had forgotten existed. Confidence didn't return overnight. It returned one small choice at a time. One peaceful morning. One joyful laugh. One boundary. One brave decision. As for Graham, he remained an active and loving father. Rowan spent weekends with him, attended baseball games together, built model airplanes, and volunteered at local community projects. Their relationship slowly healed because Graham finally understood that being a good father required far more than providing financially. It required showing respect. Not only to his son, but to Rowan's mother. At every school event, graduation ceremony, birthday celebration, and soccer match, Graham treated me with kindness and gratitude. We never became husband and wife again. But we became something equally important. Healthy co-parents. People often asked whether I regretted leaving. My answer was always the same. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because I finally started loving myself enough to believe that my son deserved to grow up watching respect instead of fear. One beautiful spring afternoon, nearly 8 years after that anniversary, Rowan stood beneath the now enormous maple tree preparing to leave for college. The old birdhouse still hung from one sturdy branch, weathered by countless seasons yet still standing strong. He smiled as he looked at it. Then he hugged both his father and me. He thanked us for teaching him the most important lesson of his childhood. Not how to avoid mistakes, but how to take responsibility for them. Not how to build wealth, but how to build trust. Not how to win arguments, but how to protect the people you love. As he drove away toward his new future beneath the bright afternoon sun, Graham quietly stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally he said something simple. He thanked me for leaving. Years earlier those words would have sounded impossible. Now they made perfect sense. Because my leaving had forced both of us to become the people we should have been all along. Before this story ends, I'd love to hear from you. What do you believe is the foundation of a healthy family? Love, trust, respect, forgiveness, or something else? Please leave a meaningful comment below and share your thoughts with our community. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember this, real love never asks someone to sacrifice their dignity. Respect is not a reward for being perfect, it is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the bravest step toward healing, hope, and a better future. And when you choose courage over fear, you don't just change your own life, you change the lives of everyone who is watching you, especially the little hearts learning what love is supposed to look like.